Welcome to the Holistic Psychiatry Podcast. I'm Courtney Snyder, a physician and holistic adult and child psychiatrist. In this episode, I'll be talking about how we can assess and lower our EMF exposure, so our exposure to electromagnetic fields. And this will be a self-assessment basically for those who are wanting to do a little or those who are wanting to do a lot. So in the newsletter, I have some images. If you'd like to see those, you can go to my website at CourtneySnyderMD.com, newsletter, or Substack. And basically, I'll be walking through ways we can assess our exposure to EMF, and then with each of those things, how we can lower it. So normally, with two-part episodes or newsletters, I start with an explanation of how the root cause contributes to brain symptoms, and then in the follow-up episode, I address what can be done. Because the topic of electromagnetic fields, or EMF, can be fear-inducing for some, and because there's already so much scary functional medicine content out there, I thought I'd start with how we can assess and lower our exposure. In the next newsletter, I'll discuss the research on the many ways EMF appears to impact the brain and other parts of the body, factors that raise our susceptibility to becoming hypersensitive to EMF, and how we can lower that susceptibility. EMF exists on a spectrum, which includes UV light, the visible spectrum, and infrared, among other types. As I discuss EMF in this episode, however, and when you hear about EMF when it comes to health concerns, I'm referring to 4 types. First, radio frequencies. Any wireless technology, cell phones, Wi-Fi, have radio frequencies that are coming off of them. This is considered the most ubiquitous and increasing form of EMF, and is that which is also thought to be especially concerning when it comes to health. However, the other 3 that I'll mention now can cause problems as well. Those include magnetic fields, and this is from motors and power lines. Electric fields, which essentially is an electric wiring. There's a lot of overlap with magnetic and electric fields. And then dirty electricity, which is a mixture of frequencies. Most of the interventions that I'll mention will relate to radio frequencies. In a recent newsletter, I showed using video the radio frequencies coming off my cell phone when I have airplane mode on versus when it is off. Though some of us are sensitive and become more symptomatic with exposure, that doesn't mean that we're the only ones being impacted. Everyone can benefit from lowering their exposure. As with toxins, EMF can contribute to inflammation and oxidative stress and can impact the microbiome and brain. Anything we do to decrease it will benefit our health. Completely eliminating exposure to EMF, however, is not possible. So here I'll be giving a checklist that will help you assess and already start to lower your own exposure if you'd like. This is not an all or none endeavor. Some will find a couple of ways that have the biggest impact for them, and others will want or need to go deeper into the list. You might find it helpful to print it off and to mark the situations that apply to your circumstances and even rank your priorities. You could also make a few notes related to your health before you make such changes, and do a before and after comparison. How is your sleep, attention, energy, addictive tendencies, and mood? And if you have mast cell activation or other inflammatory symptoms, you might notice if there is a change in those as well. If you feel a need to address all of these listed sources as soon as possible, consider pulling back into that right brain perspective and start with gentle, sustainable, and incremental steps. A good place to start is with those sources that are closest and those in which you're getting the longest amount of exposure each day. Just to point out, I'm not a building biologist, electrician, or computer expert. I'm sharing with you what I've learned and lived in the last 3 years. Because technology is evolving so rapidly, I'll continue to be learning. Terms to know. So when we talk about within our homes, how, for example, our internet access is getting into our homes and then distributed to our devices or computer, these terms will be relevant. So the first is our modem, the box in our house that receives information from our internet company and sends it out to the devices. Ethernet cord is basically a cord that sends this information. It connects the modem to intermediaries. That intermediary could be an Ethernet port, where an Ethernet cord comes from the modem to that port, and then from that port goes to the different places we need it to go. Or the modem could be going, in the case of Wi-Fi, to a router, and then when it gets to the router, it sends it off wirelessly. So in the newsletter, I'm showing a picture of what an Ethernet cord looks like. So an Ethernet port, again, is the small box connecting the modem by an Ethernet cable, sometimes that's bright yellow, that has multiple ports allowing connections to multiple rooms. So this was the general setup where the wires were in the walls coming to an Ethernet jack in your rooms, and you would plug your devices into that jack. And so actually that was very high speed and also very low EMF. And what is the norm now is the modem connecting to the router, where the information is converted to a Wi-Fi signal, and then that communicates without wires to the computers and other smart or wireless devices in your home. And this puts off radio frequencies. And in the top image on the newsletter is a drawing that I did of the many sources of radio frequencies that we can have on our bodies if we're wearing certain devices, or within our homes and even out into our neighborhood. A booster is something that can be in one's home that is taking that signal from the router and extending it further. And so this allows stronger signals at further distances. And this puts off even higher radio frequencies. So with all that being said, finally on to my list of 10. And in this case, it's the 10 places we can assess and lower our EMF exposure. I try to format this as a checklist. So number 1 is the cell phone. And we can turn the speaker on to avoid holding the phone to our head. And the brain tissue, which I'll talk about in the next episode, is especially vulnerable. We should not be holding the phone to the head. Similarly, we should not be carrying the phone directly on our body or in our pocket, unless it's in airplane mode, or better yet, completely turned off. In the phone company's fine print, they even recommend keeping the phone at least 1/4 of an inch away from the body. There are covers and carriers that have protective EMF shielding with belt attachments. So you can't really talk on it when it's in that carrier. You could carry it on you. It would be keeping it away from the body. And if it has the EMF shielding, it would also be lowering your exposure if it was on. Because aside from the brain, the testes are especially susceptible to the impacts of EMF. Also, you can keep it, again, on airplane mode when you're not using it. You can decrease the amount of time that you're on the phone. When at home or in your office, you can consider, instead of using your cell phone, using a landline or a voice over IP phone, such as what I have is an OOMA, OOMA, which connects to that Ethernet port via an Ethernet cord, and then to your phone, which I show a picture of on the newsletter. If you're using a cell phone to access the internet when at home, you could consider using an Ethernet cord with an adapter. It's a different adapter, but nonetheless. And these adapters and the Ethernet cords can all be found on Amazon. If you want to go further with using a phone and your Ethernet cord with an adapter to make calls and text, you would need to use an app, something like WhatsApp. Be sure to put your phone on airplane mode when you do this. And I'll mention this later when it comes to the computer. Anytime you're connecting by Ethernet and you don't need your Wi-Fi on your phone, or you don't need Bluetooth on, be sure to turn it off, because what these devices are doing is they're reaching out with their EMF to the EMF from your Wi-Fi or from cellular if you're not at home or in your office. And so you don't want to be keeping those on unintentionally when you're taking these extra steps to lower your EMF. On a personal note, and to add to those recommendations, my sister is visiting, and she was thoughtful about turning off her cell phone. However, as we were talking, I started to have some subtle symptoms: tingling, slight muscle tightness, numbness in my feet, and asked her if by chance her laptop was on. It wasn't. But I got my meter out, which measures radio frequencies, and I could see that her phone, despite being off, was still putting off high EMF. When she turned it on and then turned her phone on airplane mode, which would disable essentially the Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, and location, the EMF dropped down, and then she turned her phone off, and it was fine. Consider turning on airplane mode prior to turning off your phone. Mine doesn't require that, but hers does, and I don't know what yours might require. Number 2, other on-the-body wireless devices. Remember that we're electric beings with our own innate electricity, and this innate electricity can be interfered with by EMF. And so that's one of the many ways that EMF can impact health. So what we can do as far as those devices is really to consider avoiding using ear pods and instead use wired earphones. They still are delivering some EMF, but not as much as ear pods are, which again, they're directly in our heads. They're directly on us, and they're directly in our heads and near our brain. There's also what's called air tubes, which have the least exposure. We can avoid any devices that are communicating wirelessly, such as Apple Watches and things like Fitbits. We can avoid having laptops, despite the name, or tablets on our lap. We can consider if we have a CPAP machine or even hearing aids with wireless communication, we could consider discussing that with our doctor and seeing what options we might have. Number 3, our bedroom. Consider creating a sleep sanctuary. Radio frequencies, which again come off wireless devices, decrease melatonin levels and increase cortisol. If we can lower our exposure while we're sleeping, we've significantly impacted 1/3 of our day. So we can have the phone off or at least in airplane mode. We can turn off Wi-Fi. This can usually be done just by unplugging that modem. We can turn our computers off and any other devices off. We can unplug as much as possible in our room. And so this lowers the other types of EMF. So for example, if we're in our bed next to a nightstand with a lamp and there's an outlet right there, that outlet is putting off some magnetic and electric fields that, though they don't travel as far as radio frequencies, we have them pretty close to our head. And all of this can impact how restfully we sleep. A step further could even be turning off the breaker to the bedroom. And again, this lowers those other forms of EMF. We can consider the risk and benefits if we have baby monitors. Children, and especially babies, are susceptible to the effects of EMF, and there's a lot of reasons for this, which I'll comment on in the next episode. We can make sure the electric panel, so this is that box within the wall that has all the breakers, that usually has a metal door, and that metal door is because of the EMF that comes off that. We can make sure that that isn't near where we sleep or where we spend a lot of time, such as at a desk. This could also be a source of radio frequencies if the meter that measures our utility of electricity, which is on the other side of that panel and outside, if that's a smart meter, which electric companies are increasingly moving towards, and perhaps at this point most are using those, then that electric panel also can be near where we're getting a high source of radio frequencies. And I'll talk about what we can do about those smart meters when I get there. Number 4, desk and office. We can use Ethernet cords to connect the computer to the wall jack if we still have that, or if we've had someone come in and connect those Ethernet cords through the wall. Or you can even directly run an Ethernet cord from the modem down the hall. And again, when using Ethernet cords, turn off the computer's Wi-Fi. Instead of a wireless keyboard, we can use a wired keyboard. Instead of a wireless mouse, we can use a wired mouse. In the newsletter, I have a picture of my setup with a laptop using an adapter that has an Ethernet cord that runs basically to my Ethernet port, which runs to the modem. And on that, there are USB ports where I have my mouse and my keyboard connected. Again, when using a wired mouse and keyboard, be sure to turn off the Bluetooth on your computer. If you have a wireless printer, you can use the cord that it comes with and connect that to your computer, and again, turn off the Wi-Fi in the printer. As far as cords, and these could be electric cords or even some of the cords that I'm talking about, they can be quite near our feet, so you really want to move them away from you at least 1 meter. We can also increase the distance from our computer. Even if we're using Ethernet, we're still getting off any computer some EMF that's coming off the screen. When you move your computer out, I would say mine is almost 2 feet. I will increase the font on my computer, and I think for me that's pushing control and then the plus sign. We can also use a wired phone, as I mentioned, that voice over IP phone. Even the landline phones that are wireless, they put off a lot of EMF because the phone is having to communicate with the base. So there still are phones on Amazon that have a cord that connects the base to the handheld part of the phone. Number 5, other interior sources. We can unplug our microwave when not in use. If we have a smart thermostat, we can go to the menu and disable it. So anytime you see that sort of wireless icon on a screen, whether it's, in this case, the thermostat, that would tell you that you have a smart thermostat and that it's on. So even if you're not using it and it's not communicating with something, it could still be putting off those frequencies. You might consider if you have smart locks, a smart garage door, smart refrigerator, or other smart devices, and consider disabling or replacing. And again, all these things that I'm talking about, I'm letting you know where the sources of EMF are coming from. Some people will want to limit as much as possible, and some people will do some of these. I feel like it's my job to tell you where they are, because I certainly didn't know until I started to learn about this. And many people are not even using these devices and getting significant exposures. Number 6, exterior of the house. As I mentioned, electric meters are located on the opposite side of the wall of your electric panel. And this communicates it's usually round and it has like a glass covering. And this communicates your usage of electricity to your electric company. If you have a smart meter, this is being communicated wirelessly. And if you don't have a smart meter, this is being communicated by somebody coming out and reading your meter. But if you have a smart meter, you can contact your electric company. And if you're not sure, you can contact your electric company and ask. And if you ask if it's wireless. Don't ask. If you say, is it a smart meter, they kind of recognize that increasingly people are concerned about smart meters. So they're trying to avoid that term. So you can ask if it's a smart meter, but you can also ask, is it communicating wirelessly? And if it is, you can ask to opt out, and they'll have someone come out, change it over to what it used to be, and have somebody come out each month. So there could be a monthly fee. I think I pay $40 a month, and when I lived in Florida, I think it might have been $30 a month. If you find that you can't opt out, which is usually not the case, however, that is possible, know that there are other options out there. I haven't had experience with it, but I understand there's a metal box that is designed to be put over the meter. Now, this is not something the electric company would do. This is something you could order and have put on top of the meter. And it basically has a small hole that allows enough information to come out to communicate to the utility company without exposing you in your home. It certainly is the case that things that we have on the exterior of our home have radio frequencies that are reaching us in the house. So you might also consider, if you have other smart meters, such as a meter that's measuring your gas usage. If you live in an apartment or condo, you might notice where the utility meters and electric panels are for the units. Sometimes they're all grouped together on one wall, and that wall could be the exterior of one person's apartment or condo. If you have a Ring doorbell, consider disabling this. If you have a security camera that uses wireless, consider it a source of EMF and weigh your risks and benefits there. Sprinkler systems may also use wireless. Number 7, car. Turn your phone off while in the car, or at least on airplane mode. The exposure we have from radio frequencies is higher in our car. We're in a metal box, and those frequencies are trying to reach, for example, our cellular service. And so more is putting off in greater attempts to reach that. So we do get much higher exposures. Consider also turning the Wi-Fi and navigation systems off. Those can be putting off quite a bit of radio frequencies. Notice where wireless is operating within the car. There's more and more each year. So collision avoidance blind spots, that's using radio frequencies. Backup mirror is using radio frequencies. The tire pressure that's communicating to your dashboard is using radio frequencies. And so you can weigh the risk and benefits and consider turning off what you can. And many of these you can do on the dashboard. Know, too, that hybrid and electric cars have higher EMF exposure than those that are not. Number 8, neighborhood. So if you'd like to know where the cell towers are in your neighborhood and how many are near you, you can put your address into a website called Antenna Search. You can also note in your neighborhood where power lines and power substations are, because these put off high magnetic and electric fields. Being too close to these can be problematic. You can also consider the location of your neighbor's smart meter and other wireless exterior technology, especially if your houses are in close proximity. This may even be a reason to consider shielding, which I'll get to. Number 9, other environments. Where there are a lot of people in one place now means there is high radio frequencies. Schools have a very high concentration of computers, tablets, in high school student phones, and in all schools, smart boards. Add to that, some schools are leasing space on top of the school to cellular companies for towers. This type of space is desirable because schools often have open space around them. The towers are not necessarily obvious. Hospitals. There are increasing concerns that the especially high EMF from medical equipment impedes healing and is contributing to antibiotic resistance. Airplanes, but this is a metal box holding many more people with many more devices and cell phones. And it does lead me to wonder, at least, how much of the increasing rate of passengers' behavioral issues are from these increasingly high EMF exposures. Number 10, measuring, shielding, and seeking help. As far as meters, I show a picture in the newsletter of the 4 that I have. One measures radio frequencies. I've used that one the most commonly. The second measures magnetic frequencies. The third, electric. And the fourth, dirty electricity. It certainly does help to be able to visualize the presence of EMF, because it can be out of sight, out of mind, even when it's affecting us. So as far as shielding, most of the building biologists that I've spoken to say that the starting place is to address the sources of EMF in our spaces. And then if necessary, shielding can be helpful. So this could be in the form of materials on one's wall. So let's say you have a neighbor whose house is putting off very high EMF. You could use shielding. There's even shielding paint. There's even shielding clothing that can be helpful. And then lastly, there are building biologists that I've referenced. And when you need a deeper assessment, expertise, and guidance, especially if you're hypersensitive, a building biologist can be found at the Building Biology Institute. Some will come out and help you measure in your home. The wireless, we know where it is. You can measure, but it's there. So a building biologist could help you do an assessment, especially of these other 3 types of EMF, and some will provide consultation remotely. In the next newsletter, I'll talk about the impacts as far as brain health and other body systems. As always, I'd love to read your thoughts and questions. Please consider subscribing at CourtneySnyderMD.com or on Substack. Until next time, take care.